Hello, everyone, and welcome to DroidCon San Francisco 2022. Hopefully everybody's energized after lunch. My name is Ben Sklar. I'm a senior product manager here at Salesforce, and my colleague over here, Wolfgang, is a mobile architect here at Salesforce, and we're excited to talk about how to build scalable and performant apps with GraphQL. Before we get started, just keep in mind some of what I'm going to be mentioning today is actually future-facing. So just keep in mind, don't make any purchasing decisions based on what you hear from me today, as you should only make those on things that are commercially available. All right, so who here has actually heard about GraphQL? Raise your hand if you've already heard about it. Okay, awesome. It's a lot of people. And who here has actually used a GraphQL API before? Okay. Still a good number of people, but not everybody. So I'm going to start today by talking about what GraphQL is, and for those of you who are already familiar with it, that's awesome to see. And then I'm going to talk about how Salesforce uses GraphQL, and I'm going to demo the new GraphQL API that we just launched at Salesforce as well, so you can kind of see how to use the GraphQL API. And then we're going to finally end with how to build on the Salesforce mobile SDK using GraphQL. And Wolfgang over here is going to lead that part. All right, so GraphQL, first and foremost, is a query language, and it's also a runtime for fulfilling those queries. And it's often compared and contrasted to REST APIs, which I'm also going to do throughout this presentation. For all of you out there who are developers, how many of you are developers in the crowd? Okay, most of you, if not all. It gives you all the power to ask for exactly what you need and nothing more, and it allows you to shape the response from the server. So I'm going to show that as well. But if you've ever called a REST API and you got back data that you did not care about, GraphQL is really going to be great for you. You get to request exactly what you want, and you only get that back. So we're going to see that as well. And finally, it enables powerful developer tools like Graphical, which I'll also be showing you all today, which lets you introspect your GraphQL schema, or in other words, it lets you see the fields and resources that you have access to. So with our new Salesforce GraphQL API, there are three main features of this. Number one is field selection, which again, this allows you to select the fields that you care about when you're making a query. Resource aggregation, this lets you choose which resources that you want to call. So this would be in comparison to with REST APIs. Instead of having to call individual REST APIs one by one, you can create one GraphQL query with multiple resources and get all of that back in one round trip to the network. So we'll see that too. And schema introspection, again, allowing you to see as a developer how to write these queries, the fields and resources that you have access to. So here's a sample. Imagine you're building an app and you need to get information about the hero object. So in this case, when you make a GraphQL query for that hero object, you're asking for the name, the height, and the mass of that object. And that's all you need for your app, and that's exactly what you get back from the server in the same shape that you asked for it. And so this is the power of GraphQL. Unlike traditional REST, you as the client, you as the developer who's making that request, controls what the response shape will look like from the server. So when you send your GraphQL query to the API, you get back exactly what you requested. So let's contrast this with REST. So imagine you went to your favorite restaurant, and imagine that you're going to order ravioli, but you don't want cheese. So you tell them, hold the cheese, I don't want it. But unfortunately with REST, with the cheese ravioli endpoint, the cheese has already been added. So you're going to get back the ravioli, the tomato sauce, and the ricotta cheese. And sure, you could take it off after the fact, but there was some data wasted there. You actually didn't want that cheese. You didn't want those fields back from the server, but you're kind of stuck. Now, some of you savvy out there in the audience are probably like, well, what about query parameters? And so yes, if your REST API supports the notion of query parameters, then sure, you can go ahead and put query parameters in the URL and request certain fields. But I want to highlight some of the challenges with this. Number one, not all REST APIs actually support this. If you know REST really well, it's not actually a specification, it's a series of guidelines. So if your REST endpoint doesn't have this functionality, you can't use query parameters at all. The other challenge would be that a URL has a certain fixed length. You cannot exceed a certain length with that URL. And so you might run into that character length when you're creating these very complicated queries within the URL itself. And then finally, the last issue is with performance. Sometimes, even with query parameters, that REST API is still going to go get all of that data. It's just not going to pass it back to you. So that is a hit maybe to a database that you didn't need. And so GraphQL solves this problem with field selection. So when you go into that restaurant, but you're using GraphQL, and you're ordering pasta, you're just going to get back ravioli. It's going to be plain because that's the only field that you chose to ship with your query. So this is how GraphQL solves this, and it's much better in this case. So now let's also talk about resource aggregation, and let's pretend that we're building a social media app. And we're going to start by using REST. So traditional REST backends expose one resource per endpoint. And so with a mobile app, you've got to send requests to several endpoints. And so in this example, we're going to have at least 5 GET requests. We need to find information about the user, about the feed, about the notifications. And again, in this example, it's over 5 round trips to the server, 5 GET requests. It might be more, it might be less, but each specific endpoint you have to make a request to. And so a visualization of this is here, 5 round trips minimum with REST. And of course, you could do these asynchronously, so it potentially could be fast. But when you think about low connectivity examples, which we'll talk about later, it's actually much better if you could do this all in 1 round trip. And GraphQL allows you to do this with resource aggregation. So let's go ahead and take a look at what this query might look like. So here, through resource aggregation, you can see for each object that you need information about, such as the user, the feed, notifications, you can ship this all in 1 GraphQL query, and it's just 1 round trip to the network. And if you notice, a great example of field selection is the bottom right-hand corner, notifications. So you only needed the count, and so that's all you are going to request. And that's all you'll get back from the server for that. So as we think about Android and mobile applications, think about how many different Android devices there are out there. There's large form factors like tablets, there's smaller devices, there are very high-end Android devices, and then there's budget Android devices. And GraphQL is really useful for all of these, especially when we think about connectivity. So Android is available in many countries all over the world, and some places have different amounts of internet connectivity. Even in places with great internet connectivity, when you move from Wi-Fi to cellular or from one tower to another, often you'll find that things may take a while. And so GraphQL, the beauty of it is it can reduce those round trips to the network. So rather than pulling a bunch of information that you didn't need, that you're not using in your app, that you're waiting for those requests to come back to you, with GraphQL, you can minimize that. Use as few round trips as you need and the least amount of data through field selection, and you'll have a much better performing app regardless of the form factor, regardless of connectivity. And for larger form factor devices, you could potentially include more fields in those requests as well. So there's a lot of benefits and advantages here with GraphQL. So now let's see how Salesforce uses GraphQL. So we actually just launched a public API, the GraphQL public API at Salesforce, and in our first release, it's going to feature UI API. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's the same API that powers the Salesforce mobile app on Android, as well as the front end for our main Salesforce CRM. So UI API is the first API family that's participating in the GraphQL schema, and we hope to add more resources over time to this GraphQL API. And we hope to bring other APIs at Salesforce too to this GraphQL schema in case you're using some of our other APIs like the tooling API or some of our other Connect APIs. Now, I've been talking entirely about querying, but a GraphQL API is not complete without mutations. So what are mutations? So querying is synonymous to reading. And for full CRUD, or create, read, update, delete, you need mutations. And so mutations would be create, update, and delete. And so we are also working on releasing those. Right now we just have query support, but we're working on mutations too. So I want to show what the GraphQL API looks like using a tool called Graphical. So this is Graphical, and it allows you to write your GraphQL queries. It makes it much easier to do so. I'm going to go ahead and run this just so you can kind of see, and then we'll talk about what exactly this is. So in this, we've got, from the top level, if you look through the documentation explorer of Graphical, we can see root type query, so that corresponds with this top piece here. And once we have mutations, that will show up as well. UI API being the first API family supported, and then record querying within UI API. And then we have all of the objects available. And so if you're a Salesforce user, we support all of the objects that are supported with UI API, standard and custom. And you'll only see the fields and resources that you have access to. So this respects all sorts of field level and object level security as well. If you've ever used SQL, you might see some parallels with some of the parameters that you can pass in to objects, arguments to those as well. But a good use case, just to kind of showcase this, imagine that for a given company, you have accounts, and then you have cases for those accounts. Imagine like case management. And you can see, okay, here's all of the information about cases, and there's some extra fields here that I might not need. So you can pull out easily the fields that you don't care about. And let's go ahead and just only have the display value here for the cases, and then you can go ahead and rerun that query. And there's also an example here of resource aggregation. We've got accounts with nested cases, so I'm basically querying for the cases of accounts, but then I want to know what are all the opportunities as well for my organization, and here we go. That's all down here. And of course, if I want to remove or add certain fields or objects, I can do that as well. So you can imagine you can really query for whatever it is you need. You can filter things out with some of these parameters as well. But that's basically all I wanted to show with this API. And the awesome thing is you're going to hear about the mobile SDK soon. It does a lot of this for you under the covers, so you don't have to make these really complicated queries. It's going to make it a lot easier for you, especially if you've never used GraphQL before. So let's go ahead and go back here. I just want to share a quick example of a story that hopefully this helps as well. So imagine you're a developer and you're working on this mobile app, and it's a mobile app that lets you order coffee. Imagine you order coffee, you pick it up, you don't try it, you go home, you try it, and you realize something is off. They actually forgot the whipped cream. You wanted whipped cream on your coffee. And so you go ahead and you start a conversation with a service agent, someone from support, and you tell them the problem, and they go ahead and refund you. And this is all powered through Salesforce Service Cloud. So the question is, how do we get that onto our app? So you could either call that GraphQL API yourself and do all that integration, or you could use the mobile SDK, which makes this all easier. So let's go ahead now and hear from Wolfgang over here about the Salesforce mobile SDK.
Thank you, Ben. So in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to answer the following questions. So we saw GraphQL, fantastic query language. It allows you to, get exactly what you need, no more, no less from the server. You can compose queries, which is something you often want to do, right? You have independent UI components, they have their own needs. You can compose their needs together into the query, and then you can decompose the answers. But I want to step back a little bit and say, okay, if you want to use GraphQL from Salesforce, first you need to be able to talk to Salesforce. And what do we offer to make that easier for you? So let's first talk about the goal. So you're trying to build what we call, pixel perfect apps. By that we mean that you have a vision for your application, and maybe you have technology you want to use, you have skill sets, you have people, you have apps already written or libraries you want to use. So we're not telling you how to do that, right? But you want to connect to CRM, you want to connect to Salesforce platform. There's a ton of features there. You can use it as a system of records. You can use it, as your database in the cloud. And you want to tap into those new query language we just showed, like GraphQL. You want to use other REST APIs we had before. So how do you put those two things together? Well, one option is you could just, read the doc and get started from scratch. And, we had to do that for our own apps. Did that higher? Yeah. Is it better? So the other option is to use the mobile SDK. So the goal of the mobile SDK is really to accelerate your productivity as developers. So it's a number of libraries that we built ourselves for our own apps. So most of the apps coming from Salesforce are using mobile SDK internally. And we open source those libraries so that you don't have to rewrite the same stuff. So the part that we open sourced is the generic portion, the boilerplate stuff that you need, but you don't really want to write. So just to give you an idea, so it's been around for a number of years. There's thousands of apps out there using it already and millions of users. Some of those apps are meant for employees, so the people using them know they are using Salesforce. They might log into Salesforce on their desktop. But there's also many apps out there that are meant for our customers, for end users, and you have absolutely no idea you're using Salesforce. So you could be using apps today. You're probably using apps today that use Salesforce as a backend and have mobile SDK embedded in them, because you don't know that some of that data actually happens to live on Salesforce. So let me tell you, give you a sense of what those building blocks are. That's really what it is, right? So we have a number of building blocks of things we've identified are being common, common use cases that regardless of your use case or the app you're trying to build, there are things you need to do. So the first example is authentication. So if you're going to put data in Salesforce, if you're going to talk to GraphQL, you need to be an authenticated user. And so it's not rocket science, to write that code, but why write it, right? It's going to be the same. You're going to have it in every one of your app. And then on the server side, we keep supporting new flows, and you would have to keep track of those changes and, review that part of your app again and again. So we didn't want every app out there to implement authentication client for Salesforce. Some might do it right, some might do it wrong. So instead, we package that into the mobile SDK. And when you use mobile SDK, you get login instantly without any work. Aside from login, there's also MDM support. So we have integration with third-party MDM. There are MDM-like features coming out of the platform as well. And so again, by having the mobile SDK in your application, you get those features for free. So we have, I'll give you just one example. If you want your app to, put a biometric screen whenever you go back in, right? So you foreground the app, maybe somebody picked up your phone from a table. You don't want them, if they're not authenticated user to the phone, to see your sensible data. Well, this is something you can control from the server, and that gets applied by the client when they use mobile SDK. Again, no effort on the developer. So it's probably a feature you want, but not a feature that you want to implement. Next, this is really the core of why you'll be using Salesforce, right? So you want to tap into those, you want to save data to the server. You want to tap into the GraphQL query language. You want to use other APIs. Sure, you could do it yourself. Just, put together right requests, parse the responses, deal with the headers for authentication, deal with refresh flow when your session expires, do all those things. You can do that. But if you use mobile SDK, then it's just a method call. And we have, helper classes for parsing of responses, helper classes putting together, the payloads and things like that. And also, we work together with the server-side team. So when the new features are getting rolled out, then we make sure to also add support for them in the SDK, so you don't have to do it again. All right, so you can talk to a server, you can read and write to a server, but you're going to have to bring some of the data down to your device. And you don't want your device to become the weakest link, right, security-wise. So, on the server, we offer all kinds of security features. We have, encryption address. We do all kinds of things that for our customers. You don't want, just because you build a mobile client, to become the weakest link and have, data being lost because you didn't secure it properly on the device. So what we offer is a secure store on the client, and we use it ourselves in our, Salesforce mobile app, Salesforce field service, and it gets reviewed regularly by our own product security team, and they make recommendation to us. They say, okay, it's time to start using secure enclave, start using better encryption. So we keep it up to date. And so by using it, you get you get the benefit of all that work, basically. So if you have your own product security team, maybe you want to do something else, but we recommend strongly that you go with this solution. So it's going to be as secure as the apps that come out of Salesforce. Another feature that's interesting for Smart Store is about dealing with that, one of the power of Salesforce, for those of you that know, is that the shape of object can change. It's very easy. It's not like a traditional database where when you want to add a column to a table is a big deal. In Salesforce, you can create new objects, add fields, and as people have been taking advantage of that. So it means that the shape of object can evolve over time. And so you need a client that can also handle this flexibility. So Smart Store can deal with object that can evolve in shape. So it's kind of a semi-structured store if you want. So it has some structure, but it's not going to break because you added a field. All right, let me keep going. So another example, so those are all examples of things we have in the mobile SDK. It's something around push notification. So Salesforce has great support for push notification. One feature I could give you as an example is end-to-end encryption. So sometimes there are requirements sometimes of having data being encrypted all the way through, right? So you don't know what intermediate server is going to go through. Do you trust APNS, Apple servers or Google servers? Maybe not. Maybe your customer is telling you, I cannot have the sensible data go over the wire unencrypted, right? And so we added end-to-end encryption. And that means that you need specific client-side code, right, to make it work. So the client talks to the server, get a key, does the decryption when the message come in. So again, you get all of this for free when you use mobile SDK. It's just an API, it's there, and you don't have to deal with it. You could build it yourself, but you'd be wasted dev cycles. All right, let me go to the last one at the bottom, which is all about offline. So we mentioned earlier, everybody's online these days, but it's not always great, right? You might drive through a tunnel sometimes, and you don't want the user experience in your mobile app to degrade just because the network is not as good. So ideally, what you want is an app that behaves the same whether it's online or offline, or online but with very good online. So one way to do that is to architect your app to talk to a local store, and independently have that local store mirror some of the data that comes from the server. It's also an easier way to build an app, right? Instead of having like conditional all over your code that say, okay, if I'm connected to the network, let me do a network call. But if I'm not, if I'm offline, let me go to local data store. You just say, no, I'm just going to talk to my database. And I hope, I want that database to mirror, a slice of data I'm interested in. And that's what the mobile sync framework within Salesforce Mobile SDK gives you. So you specify, a set of record of interest. So there's different way of specifying that set of records. In the past, it was using a SQL-like language that Salesforce offers. In the future, it's going to be with something like GraphQL. So with GraphQL, you're going to specify the set of records, related records, fields, and all of them that you want. And we are going to take care of bringing them down to the device. And then you're going to be able to interact with that data and modify it even. And then when possible, we're going to sync it back to the server. So this already exists. The mobile sync framework already exists and is being used by a number of our customers. And we allow many, many records. We have customers that take down hundreds of thousands of records. And so we're being clever about how many records we bring down. So the first sync might be very heavy, if you really have a very large data set you need on your client. But subsequent syncs are smarter. They look for the delta. So maybe that data, even though you might have a lot of data you're interested in, it doesn't change very fast. So from day to day, yes, you have millions of contacts in your org, but they're not going to have millions of new contacts every day. And so we take advantage of those things, and we keep investing and improving that framework. So once again, by tapping into mobile SDK, you can take advantage of something that gets better over time. All right, so this is still pretty high level. So you see the building blocks. You see how it could accelerate the development of your application. But where can you use this? So of course, it's available for Android, right? So we have, whether you want to use Kotlin, Java, we have example apps that show you how to do that. But there's still developers, people sometimes want to build cross-platform. Maybe you've invested into, you have the skills on your team to do that. You want to use HTML or you want to use React Native. Again, we have mobile SDK extension and bridges to Cordova and to React Native for people that want to do cross-platform development. And of course, we have the same on iOS. All right. So again, I want to be so it was still 50,000 feet, right? High, pretty high level. So what would you do, coming out of this conference if you wanted to give it a try? So you say, you have all the capabilities, there's GraphQL coming to Salesforce, there's the mobile SDK, But how do you actually get started? It's actually pretty simple. So we have a NPM package called ForceDroid. So it's Salesforce and Android, so we call it ForceDroid. We like to call everything Force, Salesforce, Dreamforce, and so on and so forth. And so you just need to install that package. Of course, you need to have an Android Studio and an Android development environment on your machine. And then for create a first application, you just run ForceDroid create, and it's going to create a very simple application in Kotlin that you can use to log into an org, and it's going to fetch some data. So it's already showing you how to talk to the backend, do authentication. And you haven't written a single line of code at this point. If you want to do more than that, we actually also have another verb for that CLI called create with template. And we have a collection of templates, and we keep adding new templates over time to do some of the more advanced capabilities, right? So for instance, we're just coming up with a template that's using Jetpack Compose and Mobile Sync to show how would you bring all those things together, the Power Compose on one hand and the Mobile Sync framework on the other. We have a template that's focused around authentication, the things I mentioned earlier. We have templates around notifications. So another template for advanced authentication. Let's say you're going to have more than one application, and you don't want users to log into each one of them. So you want to set up one of them as the identity provider, and the other ones will interact with that application to get their tokens, right? So we have example of that as well. So that's a common use case. And we have templates, of course, written in React Native and others for hybrid apps and so on and so forth. And we even have, for instance, for Mobile Sync, we have the same app kind of rewritten multiple times. We have a Java version, we have a Kotlin version, Swift and Objective-C and React Native, and we kept rewriting the same app again and again. So at least, so you can see that the same capabilities are available regardless of your language of choice. And then that's it. So once you did that, you have a working application you can actually run right away, where you don't have to make any changes to it to get it going. So finally, I should mention that if the other approach is always, to look at our documentation. So we have extensive documentation. We have Trailhead modules. So for those not familiar with the Salesforce Trailhead, it's basically a learning platform. And so we have trails and modules about all kind of topics, right? Some are very Salesforce-centric, some are about other things. You can learn to use GitHub and things like that on Trailhead. And so that's another way also to approach mobile SDK. So we have documentation, just reading through it or looking for answers. We have the trails. We have pages that are specific to Android development. Others are for any kind of development. And finally, we have a community, a Salesforce community. So it's a place where you can ask questions, and other people in the community can answer, or also the developers and engineers from Salesforce also monitor that community and provide answers. So if you've gone pretty far with the template, you've looked at the doc, you did your trails, but it's still stuck somewhere, then the community is a good place to go to get answers. And that's it.